So good evening to all the participants present here. We have Patrick Schumacher on board, and in a few minutes we'll be able to connect with him. And thank you for your patience. I appreciate your support.
Hi guys.
Hi.
Can you
How
hear
are
me?
you? Yeah, we can hear you. Good morning.
Good morning, good morning. So, is the audience ready?
Yeah, they're waiting for your presence.
Okay, cool.
We have around 300 here on Zoom, and we have other participants from Facebook. And
okay, very cool.
Here, on behalf of the Shashi School of Architecture, we would like to welcome Patrick Schumacher, one of the most prominent architects around the world. Patrick, I would like to introduce you to our director, Gayatri ma'am, who's on board.
Sure.
Hi, Architect Patrick.
Hi. Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
It's really nice to meet you online.
Yeah. Well, it's good.
And we are happy to host you. We have a lot of participants still coming in. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation through Raghav.
Sure, my pleasure.
Yeah, and in future, we always look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Great.
I would like to introduce you. We don't have your camera, so I would like to introduce our chairman as well, who's behind creating this platform for us to meet and share with students across the world. We have students from India, Dubai, and Singapore as well. And I would like to thank and introduce Rajdeepan sir, who's here with us, to connect with all the participants. And without any further delay, can we start the session? Yeah.
Okay, great. Well,
I would like to introduce you, Patrick.
Okay, please go ahead.
Just a second. A small presentation to show your journey.
Great.
Patrick Schumacher is widely recognized as one of the prominent thought leaders within the fields of architecture, urbanism, and design. Patrick Schumacher is now the principal of Zaha Hadid Architects and is leading the firm since Zaha's passing in March 2016. After high school in Göttingen, Germany, Patrick Schumacher studied philosophy, mathematics, and architecture in Bonn, Stuttgart, and London. He received his diploma in architecture in 1990. In 1988, still as a student, he joined the design studio of Zaha Hadid, engaged in the design of Wittra Fire Station, the first built project of Hadid. He was seminal in developing Zaha Hadid Architects to become a 400-strong global architecture and a design brand. In 1996, he founded the Design Research Laboratory at the Architectural Association, shortly known as AA London, where he continues to teach. In 1999, he completed his PhD at the Institute of Cultural Science, Glenford University. In 2010, Patrick Schumacher won the Royal Institute of British Architects Sterling Prize for Excellence in Architecture, together with Zaha Hadid for MAXI, the National Italian Museum for Art and Architecture of the 21st Century in Rome. Patrick Schumacher is lecturing worldwide and recently with the John Portman Chair in Architecture at Harvard's GST. And along almost 20 years, he has contributed to the fraternity over 100 articles to architecture journals and anthologies. In 2008, he coined the phrase parametricism, which is a history, which is a moment to be released, has since published a series of manifestos promoting parametricism as the new style for 21st century. And here we have with us an amazing person and prominent architect and one of the top global leaders in architecture to take over the platform. I would hand over the screen. I would like to stop my share and it's yours, Patrick.
Well, thank you so much for the generous introduction. It's very nice to have you all here. And so I will talk for about 20 minutes and we can then have a conversation as well. Yeah. So we round out the hour, I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll take 20, 25 minutes. So I will show just an overview of the new language of architecture we've developed and how it applies to many different types of buildings and scales and sites around the world. And then in the second half, I will talk about the design research lab at the AA and what we're trying to develop in terms of a new type of work environment and new type of urban environment, which is very much future oriented with artificial intelligence and interactive, creative and spontaneous architectural agents joining the human agents to create a kind of high productivity environment. So that's the research part. But I will show how this ties in with the work of the office and some of our recent work also in the domain of corporate headquarters and design of work environments, because I believe that the contemporary city is a creative knowledge economy hub more than anything. And the pulling together in the city is not only for services, but mostly for collaborating productively. So that's a theme here. And because the diversity of occupations and lifestyles and institutions which come together in the city have such a variety, and there's in a sense of a mixed use density, architecture has to become more complex and dynamic than it used to be. And that also motivates ultimately the use of computational tools to cope with that complexity. Each building must adapt to its complex surroundings, and with the new tools and the new language of architecture and the new set of values and methodologies, which I call parametricism, that's actually geared towards that new condition of generating a more rich, complex and dynamic and ever-changing urban agglomeration of knowledge workers ultimately. Of course, there's also not only work, there's entertainment, there's education, but I think there is ultimately, the difference between work and leisure is more and more blurred. There's also lifelong learning, and for me, it's a pleasure also, of course, to go to lecture, seminars, exhibitions, and that all becomes a kind of creative lifestyle, if you like. And that's a productive lifestyle. And that's for me what the city is all about. So I will show you how this kind of architecture we're developing is meant to fit into that new world where work is pleasure to a large extent. So for instance, I don't know, am I working or am I entertaining you or myself, and we're learning at the same time. So, and we can do that from home right now or from nice office spaces. So that's the theme. I will now share my screen and see how that goes.
Yeah, for sure.
Wait, I think we're going here. Share that. And I'll just go to the beginning of the presentation. 1 second. Okay, so I sometimes show this slide, so some of you have seen my lectures online, I might have seen that. It's basically an overview. You can see on the left top, I mean, is the image arrived on everybody's screen?
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, because I know there's a delay here to be considered. So this is parametric urbanism. There's a whole kind of fluid urban fields, swarms of buildings. We're looking at, we've been engaged with that. Very unusual buildings like in Gallery as a bridge. But we also go into interior design, and there we're also talking about swarms of furnishings creating field conditions, something very fluid, and we all the way go down to, of course, detail like fashion items, product design, because all of this is for us a continuity of the design universe and it all relates also to communication, to bringing people together and to let people understand who is around, what's going on, what are the intentions of the various spaces and actors. So architecture's communication. So it's a very broad paradigm which encompasses all the design disciplines, including, by the way, graphic design, interaction design, media design, We haven't done that much of this, but that will be the next stage when we're talking about more and more telecommunication. The framing of these spaces and the way we display the various characters on screen, where we place buttons, this is also design, and it's also human-centered design. It's also communication-oriented design. So that's something we will get into in the future more and more, as I suspect. I've been talking about this under the heading of cyberspace. I just put in this perspective that for me, the design discipline encompasses everything we ever encounter in our lives, in our field of vision. Everything we touch, feel, and use to communicate with each other is a designer's work, including the laptop and the iPhone in your hand, but also the graphic icons there and the virtual spaces you enter into. So I will emphasize that I include that into our competency as architects. So we have to be aware of the, let's say, power of the discipline. We have universal competency and also exclusive universal competency with respect to the totality of the built environment, world of artifacts, and world of media of communication. And there's always a design aspect, and everything we use has been touched by a colleague. And now you have to remember that the influence anybody has now globally as well to influence the totality of the way we design the next generation of object spaces, interfaces, is everybody can participate in that. So if you throw something online, you can influence the way the world evolves phenomenologically, in terms of its physiognomy, in terms of look and feel. That's all up for grasp, and that's what we are collectively in charge of. And when we mean me, you, and all those listening globally, and everybody who's part of that profession. So that's a premise. And so I go to the next slide. So and again, I'm just showing you a few more of the examples. We have, of course, started to work with a lot of public buildings. There's always a pride to do a kind of a cultural center in the center of a city where you have a lot of beautiful events, like maybe lectures, concerts, exhibitions, events of public reflection. They're very special, but we are not only doing this. We do all the components of the beautiful city. So here you can see examples of cultural buildings, but also office buildings. On the top left corner is Galaxy in Beijing, where we actually locate our own office. We have our own office in Beijing embedded in our own building, and that's hundreds and literally thousands of small companies who are part of that urban cluster there, with co-working zones, but a lot of social amenities and restaurants as well packed in. So these kind of the mixed-use buildings we love, and that's real life. And of course, cultural buildings also very important. And I'm using cultural facilities all the time. So in London, for instance, where we did the Aquatic Center or the Serpentine Sackler Gallery, public spaces we go back to a lot. There's with galleries and the debates and talks. I'm visiting Tate Modern a lot. So that's all. It is an important event spaces, but again, I'm also very much interested in work environments. So here, just randomly showing you recent projects like a beautiful hotel in Macau, an office tower in Milan, but also public infrastructure and private houses. Why not? And I think in the future, when we can work more from home, private houses will also become important. And also not ashamed to say, so we're doing housing for the poor, very, very small housing, and I'll show you that, but also we need to have larger houses for leaders where they also can gather, the elites of the world can gather in London, big houses to debate. I mean, they are more like social spaces than spaces of private consumption oftentimes. So we also love to do this. And also what I like about these kind of villas for the rich, basically they're showing how we all want to live in the future. There's something aspirational, you know, how we can create the beautiful, domesticate and make the planet a beautiful home for all of us. Yeah. And some show a little bit earlier what it means, and later on we can all participate in some of these comforts and elegant modes of existing on the planet. This is just the detail of the Macau hotel. Just more so to show the richness of materials we're using, steel, glass, concrete, fiberglass, GRC, new materials, and the richness of forms. So it's the endless forms of nature, nearly. And that's the importance of parametrism. It's not just a series of classical, let's say, types and details and materials, but it's very, very open-ended. But of course, it's also important to realize these are not arbitrary forms. They are always guided by giving form to functions. I'm interested in social functionality, but also technical functionality, where a lot of these forms are also optimized to meet elegantly and with the least use of resources the needs of social life. So this building, for instance, is very much, the morphology is all about passive systems and environmental adaptation, with catching the cool winds and shading a lot the hot sunlight in Saudi Arabia, for instance. These kind of shaping parameters, environmental engineering parameters, structural engineering parameters are very important, but ultimately it's the social interaction parameters, and I will come to that later, which are of importance. So this is one of those examples where we're doing also kind of very small housing apartments. Actually, they're kind of service apartments for quick turnover, something in between a hotel and an apartment building. These are little capsules. Everybody, all of these elements individually crafted with different vistas and views and embedded in an old historic center. But of course, and recently as well, we're still doing the large, let's say, public spaces. It's a complex with an opera house, a museum, and a multi-purpose hall in a beautiful setting in Changsha. But this is also a part of a new city development. So this is often the case that a cultural building seeds a whole district. So what they've created here is they created a lake and placed the beautiful public building on the lake, and then gather business and residential towers around such a public, let's say, fulcrum. And that's often where we come in as architects, where we generate that special moment of beauty, festive thrill, and where it's kind of the right frame for cultural gatherings. We recently also gotten more and more into infrastructure projects, and you know that we're actually designing at the moment the new Navi Mumbai airport. I will not be able to show you that, but we have just recently completed the new Beijing airport, the dashing Beijing airport. So where we're bringing this kind of sensibility of elegance, beauty, optimized shell structures, large spans, a kind of sense of freedom of spatial flows into the more mundane domains of infrastructure as well. It's a very beautiful project, very open and public project. The public uses that a lot for shopping and just hanging out. So there will be a new district center in its own right there as well. So some glimpses of that with a lot of natural light coming in and guiding the passenger through the airport as well. Residential buildings and towers. So this is the building. I'm just showing it as well because we're interested in structure and using the structure, the skeleton of the building to give it a character identity and also differentiate. The structure isn't the same all across the tower. You have much more accumulation of weight as well as moment forces in the lower part of the tower, and then it modulates itself and becomes lighter and more filigree into the top. And then we can also fill the programs accordingly, differentiated with respect to the public spaces on the bottom. Then we have 3 apartments, 2 apartments at the top. We have very large open apartments. So this kind of synthesis and correlation between structural differentiation and programmatic differentiation, and doing something kind of elegant, graceful, and characterful, not because we're inventing an arbitrary form, but because we're now able to let, for instance, structural forces giving shape to them relative to also the spaces we need to lift up and frame, we're getting a kind of quite strong iconic image, but it is not an invented image. It is a kind of natural image of the structure. Another idea recently we had in terms of tower design when it comes to office spaces, spaces of work, but also mixed use towers, which would include retail zones and hotel zones potentially, that we would like to hollow out the tower. Because what's important is that we can navigate a tower like a public kind of street, that we can have inter-visibility and inter-awareness between collaborating teams and firms in a cluster of firms like that. So the new Beijing Tower, Lisa Tower, where we've done that, and we have done that concept a number of times. So it's very important, I think, to have open and intervisibility, not only within the tower, but also, as you can see, from one tower perhaps to the next. So because the big window into the urban context is also opened up. So more of this concept, we at the moment developing another corporate headquarter, conglomerate, Taikang in Wuhan, where we have all the departments and different players coming to one big building. There's retail on the bottom. So it is really like the building as a district, nearly as a city district, with a lot of public spaces, intervisibility, inter-awareness, rather than allowing the core to obscure everything. So that there's usually no vistas across level, and even on a single level, the core would obstruct the interconnection between the different parts of that floor plate. So here we're saying towers without cores, open towers, atrium towers, the idea of the mega void or mega atrium. So, and we've done that here. We're doing that in another corporate headquarter, which we've just won in for a telecommunication company, Oppo in Shenzhen. It's a cluster of towers, different parts and departments, but also we're using a number of atria and the major atrium in the center of the tower to where you have a kind of sense of coming together and bringing key aspect of the company into a big kind of joined up space. You said I need to mention what kind of books I should recommend. So these are the books I've written and published, which you can see that. It's called The Outer Purpose of Architecture. It's a big theory of architecture, historically grounded, also rehearsing the whole of architectural theory and history since Alberti, and showing how architecture developed, particularly the stage of modernism, and what it means today to transform architecture once more from modernism into what I call parametricism. And I will also talk about the idea of architecture as communication, the idea of the so-called semiological projects, where we care about the different spaces, colors, materials, meaning something and indicating what's going on in the building. So there's a lot of, it's like, you can use it like a textbook.
Mm-hmm.
There has been not much of that kind in recent years. It's a systematic treatise which depicts all the aspects of the discipline, what the discipline has evolved in terms of concepts and methodologies over the years, and what is the latest stage of what we've achieved, how we've achieved this, and what we might be doing going forward. So that's highly recommended for students. Use it like a textbook in 2 volumes. And another one, I don't have an image, is what I also recommend is I've edited an AD, architectural design. Most of you might be familiar with that.
Yeah.
With that publication. I think that's about 3 years ago, Parametrism 2.0, where I also have 2 of my own articles, and I'm gathering all the great protagonists of that movement with their latest works. And I have an introduction and 2 programmatic articles there as well, talking about social functionality and the semiological projects. And I'm talking about a new form of urbanism, which I called market-based urban order. So that's the other one I would recommend. So if you have these on your desk and work through it, I think it's very important for young architects to not only pick up the skills and tools and intuitively understand what the new styles and possibilities of design are and become virtuoso designers intuitively. They should also understand the rationales, the good reasons, the advantages why they should prefer and are they intuitively drawn to these ways of working. What's better about it? What's more powerful and life enhancing about these ways of working? All the advantages. And so that is architectural theory. Theory is about giving good reasons, explaining why we should work in certain ways, and not only because we've imitated our neighbors or our peers, or we kind of intuitively picked that up. That's not good enough, because you have detractors and people who don't understand and are maybe alienated by the innovative ideas and would like to stick with more traditional forms. You need to make the argument. And that has been the role of architectural theory ever since Alberti, that when you have innovation and not just do what everybody else has been doing, if you move from tradition-bound building where you simply do what always has been done to something new, you need to explain why. People will be suspicious of what you're up to, and you need to explain what you're trying to do here. So that's why architectural theory is very important for anybody who wants to be innovative and don't want to rely on, let's say, traditions which are no longer questions. Why you're doing this? Well, we have always been doing that, and so on and so forth. So that's very important. Architectural theory is very important, and that's the way I'm focusing on. I'm focusing on the explaining why we design the way we design now, and what the new rationality we can achieve. So that brings me also to this these projects, and where we're talking about business organization. I mean, business organization are hard-nosed, they're functionally oriented, they just want to be more productive. It's highly pragmatic, and yet they understand that what we have to offer, these kind of open, transparent, fluid spaces, might be doing good work for them. So and has also been my theme for many years. If the new ways of working in parametrism is actually very congenial to the new business climate, to the network organization, to open participatory ways of working, to agile working, dynamic working, where competencies are openly distributed in teams, where boundaries between departments are getting opened and blurred, where you have where you have gradients rather than harshly segmented domains of competency. So all these themes of the, let's say, contemporary network business culture are actually represented and facilitated by the repertoire of parametrism. So parametrism is hardworking, innovative, high productivity architecture. And it shows itself most potently in the world of corporate headquarters, where you have, places like Google, or this one is a technology center for banking in Russia. That's where you have the prosperity engines of the world, and they're seeking out our architecture, and that means a lot. So that's strong, and you can see. Did you see that video?
Yeah, it's starting to play, I guess.
Was it playing? Was it playing? Okay, maybe I should. So that's the kind of open spaces across levels, which are great. And then the way you can see the way the furniture is kind of distributed, all open plan. And that's what we're working on with my students. So here you can see a cluster of buildings. I decided to create a kind of, let's say, creative industry cluster or hub, a district in North London. And I will show you the images on there. So you can see the very porous buildings. They're very open to their surroundings. They have a lot of courtyards, a lot of atria and open spaces, and they have a nice complexity and differentiation. And then what you'll see as well is that within these structures, you have a lot of mobile elements, moving furniture. This is robotic, intelligent furniture and building features, actually, partitions and windows and courtyards, which are all kind of spontaneously thinking along, if you like, with what the building as a social organism needs to achieve in terms of its collaborative trajectory. So you have a kind of spontaneous environments, creative environments, not only responsive environments. So I'm thinking about these kind of kinetic environments where the I'm not sure if that's visible now.
Not yet.
Where we have continuous reconfiguration. I play that again, of the elements, and they form different clusters, different formations for different social events, different communication events, so that they're super productive. They can achieve many different things. So instead of having all these spaces sitting there empty and you only use them once a day when you move in for the meeting and they're empty the rest of the day, everything is in continuous utilization. So you get a more dense and high productivity work environment. And for that, we're thinking about robotic, machine learning, empowered, intelligent systems. And then what we do, I'm not sure is this video starts playing here. We are showing how these transformations happen, and we also simulate and model the audiences, the interaction, the human actors, and how they join and meet each other, gather together with and facilitated by and guided by the architectural actors. So we're talking about some kind of symbiotic ecosystem with man, machine, to make a beautiful, productive, and elegant life where you don't run down empty corridors, where you don't find your co-collaborators, but where the building also signals and guides you, where the building brings people together, and where you can intuitively follow the guiding gestures of the building to find your way and find yourself participating in a dynamic choreography, if you like, of many participants. And so this includes a lot of exterior spaces. I think we should step out, and we can also in the summer live and work and meet in courtyards, in shaded zones, etc. So that's the kind of research program which I've been doing at the AA. So there's another one. I have a number of projects, and they all click together and form an urban district. And this is, as I said, an activation also of urban space. Large privatized, so that can be much more Europe. That doesn't mean that they're inclusive and inviting audiences to events, sit there under you, and so you can move from inside to outside, and you have continuous configuration, moving and run as well as working. You're not sitting necessarily on your desk and the whole day. You need to continuously understand what everybody else is doing and coordinate what you're doing with what everybody else is doing. And a lot of this communication works. Is that relatively visible video?
Yeah, it's playing. The video is playing, but it's a bit slow.
Okay.
But it's something beautiful, something interesting we are witnessing.
Yeah. So you can see how the furniture keeps reconfiguring, and so you see the possibility here is that when we design spaces, we don't want to only we're not interested in the space as such. We're in how it's occupied, how people are gathering, moving, using spaces. What is furniture? So it's a life process. So what I'm saying now is, whenever we design, we want to show also how this impacts on occupancy, how this structures the social interactions. So life process modeling is, for me, the simulation of the social functionality. And that's what we're in charge. We have to, we're not engineers. The technical functionality, that's what the engineers are doing. Of course, we collaborate, but what we're really in charge is social functionality. So we need also tools of testing and simulating and understanding what the social functionality could be. And then we also actually, in the firm itself, we're measuring some of those events. And we're measuring encounter frequencies, communication frequencies, types of communication. So this is becoming a proper social science discourse to enhance an architect's strategic social functionality enhancements through design. So I think that's the next level for architecture. And that's something which serious clients who care about the productivity of their institution, of their staff, or of the events they're hosting should be interested in. And that and at a certain degree of scale and complexity, where you have hundreds and thousands of people distributed across hundreds of spaces, you can no longer just look at the drawing and say this works or doesn't work. You need to understand how well it works. And if it could work much better, I mean, you have to remember, if you look at the cost of a building, of a corporate building, compared to the salary you invest in, and the people, the human capital, it's multiple. You know, the real estate cost is only a relatively small percentage, certainly less than 10%. So we need to look at the benefit, not only the cost of the building. Maybe you have to spend 2 or 3 times more on your building, but if you get, or only 50% more, but if you double productivity and encounters and knowledge exchange in your staff, and make and thrill them and energize them for working, you have a very compelling cost benefit reason to invest more in the built environment and make it a better built environment. So that's what's important to focus on this. And you can see the kind of thrilling density of occupation across levels. So the simultaneity of openness and intervisibility, there's a lot of intimacy and local conditions. But of course, they're also continuously shifting and moving. So there's another video right here where we can see how we're animating these spaces. So there's another one. I'm not sure that comes through yet, but
not yet. Yeah, we started.
It's running in the loop, so you get a bit of a. It's just to get a sense of how this vision of a new architecture, which is life enhancing. Basically, what I'm doing is, you know, we have for 10, 20 years, we've seen in art galleries interactive installation where you have installation which have sensors and actuators, and it's just toying, it's just playing, it's just as if what could be. Now let's make it real, let's bring it into the built environment. And I stopped with this final video where you get an overview, and you can see this is all student work, by the way. So this research is AADRL, and for those who are ambitious, should come to London to join the master degree studio. It runs for 18 months. We're working in teams. You'll be tooled up with software, but also intellectually, and then you learn to help us, basically at the frontier of design research, to develop architecture forward. A lot of those, the best and brightest, of course, then join our firm and continue the good work either in our research department or, of course, and with all the projects we are engaged with globally. So that's been a fantastic symbiosis from Zaha, the architects, and myself in particular. But Zaha has been teaching it there already. I've been teaching there for over 20 years now, and to develop a continuous development for the firm, to bring on capacities we couldn't develop purely as a business, because in business life you have to be much too quick to be radically innovative. So we need advanced research to bring in those new ideas, and then we can feed them in, you know, with a delay factor of 10 years sometimes into our professional work. So we've done that with urbanism, we've done that with what I call tectonism, like optimization tools, etc. And we're doing this now with social energy optimization. It's a research project at the AA. Now we have dedicated research group within the firm, also a PhD group, and now we're building this up into a proper service that we can actually deliver. And that's the way we're going to have key clients like Google, Facebook, major banks, Tencent. We're already having a Tencent. We're going to be at the forefront of delivering to the tech industry, to the all these industry clusters which we're building up, and from there we're moving on, of course, into all the aspects of life, which will eventually be benefiting from these new capacities. But I think that the initial stage for this becoming reality will be, for instance, Google headquarter, Tencent headquarter. I'm sure there's a lot of opportunity as well in India, but we haven't made contact yet with the best of India's corporates.
When the video, sorry, Patrick, when the video is playing, your voice is getting broken, like a bit.
Okay. Is the video playing now?
Yeah, there's like, yeah, the video is playing, and once you speak, there's an like interruption in your voice.
Ah, okay, then I shut my mouth.
No, I don't mean that. I think there's lag in transfer of data. Yeah, now it's stopped.
Okay, so that was my presentation, and we can now maybe move on to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Patrick. It was an amazing presentation, actually a very inspiring and a motivating one for students. And thanks for giving the resources as well for students to look at. And one of the significant points was that how does theory of architecture support architects and students of architecture, to evolve as well. So we have a very interesting session, like we discussed, a very quick rapid fire round, maybe 9 to 8 questions, which I'm going to shoot out for you. What are some of your early influences in your childhood days that eventually motivated you to take up architecture?
Wait 1 second, maybe I should
stop sharing your screen.
Yeah, how would I can't find the button right now.
On top of your you see stop share.
Wait, not right now. Now I've made you very small. Wait. Got meeting controls.
There's a stop share on the next to your camera webcam.
Stop share. No.
Are you on Mac?
Ah, now I see it. Now I see it. Is it actually still sharing?
Yeah.
Or am I stopped sharing? It's still sharing? Ah, stop sharing.
Stop
okay.
sharing. Yeah.
Okay,
no.
Fine, great. So now I can see more of you guys as well.
So, so what are some of your early influences in your childhood days that eventually motivated you to take up architecture?
Well, actually, there are two things. I mean, this is more of an accident. My father hired an architect when I was little, and so this was just the sense that architects are cool characters. A very elegant guy. He has a beautiful car, and he designed a kind of extension to our house.
Mm-hmm.
That's very superficial, but when I fell in love with architecture was at when I was about 12 years old. At arts class, I came across the work of Mies van der Rohe. There were some images of the Barcelona pavilion from 1929, and they just looked so elegant, so otherworldly beautiful. And I was getting interested, and I looked up the work of Mies van der Rohe. There was also a film which they had created about his work, and I just loved that kind of otherworldly elegance, that lightness, that purity and modernity simply. So that was when I was growing up in the 70s. I had that experience, and that never left me. So I went then first into philosophy and mathematics, but then I went back to architecture.
Right. So when did the idea of parametricism initiate and evolve? Like a very brief.
Well, what is interesting is so when I started with Zaha Hadid, I was a student in London in the late 80s, and I joined her. That was the era of deconstructivism. I mean, that was a very hot new
Topic.
movement, deconstructivism. There was a show at MoMA in New York. Zaha was kind of one of 7 protagonists. There were some publications and debates. And the themes of deconstructivism I was intrigued by. This was complexity, the idea of layering spaces. It looked very strange, but then there was a lot of thinking behind it. And out of deconstructivism, after a few years, particularly also through Zaha's genius and intuitions, when we worked with this level of complexity where we started to layer and intersect spaces and embed them in complex conditions, we realized that when the repertoire of deconstructivism with this kind of, let's say, clashing of forms, a lot of angles, they became after very quickly, let's say, difficult to find your way in such a composition. It became too complicated. And so when you do such drawings, you know that there's something wrong with the building you're designing if you don't find your own way in your own drawing, where you don't know where you've been drawing anymore. So what we learned and intuitively started to do, when you intersected forms and we wanted to fit a building into an irregular site in the city, we used more and more curves. And then also what Zaha came up with, we use kind of transitions, smooth transitions and gradients. And with curves and gradients, and the elements were not just clashing, they were kind of melded, you get that same richness, diversity, that complexity you needed, because you have all these different spaces and the irregular sites, and you can make it more legible. You can find your way and you can make it more beautiful, and not just this kind of visual chaos. So it evolved. We discovered it out of the search for making, I would now call it, making complexity legible and beautiful. And that's why we have discovered what I now call parametrism much later. But initially it was done by hand. But then when we discovered the use of computers, computational tools, we found some of those tools, particular splines, very, very helpful, and certain ways of stretching and adapting forms. Then we became also connected up with the new computational tools which came out of the animation industry. So they were not the AutoCAD. So we introduced AutoCAD and drafting for plans very late. We started with 3D modeling. So that developed into something which was initially called folding in architecture. There was also very important, Eisenman was involved in this, and within the Eisenman studio, Greg Lynn, and we all met at Columbia University in the early 90s when I was teaching with Zaha. That was also the first time Greg Lynn was teaching. Jesse Reiser, another protagonist. So we developed the new paradigm. And for me, retrospectively, that is the first stage of parametrism. We didn't call it that. But in retrospect, I'm integrating that. So that actually started in the kind of mid-90s, become quite widespread already, when we all switched to digital work as well. And so then, let's say in the late 80s, it was becoming widespread. I had founded the Design Research Lab, 100% built on computational work in 96. And then in 2007, we started to, actually in 2006 and 7, we wanted to celebrate 10 years of Design Research Lab, 10 years of AADRL. And then I realized that we had for over 10 years been working on the same ideas, the same pursuit of complexity through curvilinearity, through these ideas of working with blobs and soft architectures, more than 10 years. Whereas before it seemed like there's a change of style from modernism to postmodernism to deconstructivism to minimalism. It seemed more, I was changing all the time. Now we had been stable for 15 years. And I thought that must mean something. This is really something we seem to be not getting away from. This is something permanent. And that's why I said this needs a name, a proper name. This is actually as important as modernism. It's not one of those short styles like deconstructism, which actually was only a few years and had only a few characters and a few small buildings. We at that time also in the 2007 and so on, we had already done a number of larger buildings. So I thought this is really of the same significance as modernism. And that's where I said it needs a name, we need to think it through, we need to kind of canonize it, and it becomes a proper epochal style, and I call that parametricism. But that was in retrospect, let's say at that time it was already at least 15 years of work.
Research, yeah.
Research, and we got also, you know, it was more, it started only with playing with forms. Then we discussed structure, envelope, technical translation. We applied it to many more domains, not only pavilions, to everything, in fact, and including urbanism. So parametric urbanism, we developed in the early 2000s with some big master plans we were doing. So that was I called that parametric urbanism. And then for them, it was a small step to say, okay, it is not only parametric urbanism, parametric everything, it's parametricism.
Right. So next we have very, next we have a lot of questions, but we'll cut down short because we're running out of time.
Sure.
A fun question, which was do you remember the first discussion you had with Zaha? Maybe a short, brief, few words.
Well, the first discussion, I mean, no, the first time I met her was at a conference she gave in Tate Modern on deconstructivism. And I thought she was the most brilliant and most genuine of the contributors. But then the first time we actually talked properly was during a competition when we were working on a competition in the office. And actually I was always quite outspoken and never shy enough. So we had debates, we had arguments. I don't remember exactly what, but we ended up fighting a lot actually.
Yeah.
It was very, very small group. We were all like friends, and we were working until midnight and had dinners together at the office, and it was like a small team.
Right. That was an interesting insight. So what is the vision of ZHA on Zaha the Architect Studio in the future? Like a few words.
Well, I think we want to grow a bit more. I mean, we're 400 now. I think we have great talents and we have great leaders, so we could take on more. So it's great to have India opening up for us through the airport and hopefully through some other projects. China is a big market. I hope that Europe is coming back more. It's been stagnant for too long. So we can do more, and because I like a larger organization, because first of all, we are a very close group. Many of my key leaders are ex-students, so we understand each other. It's never going to be formal and corporate. But we can then afford more research. So we have 2 research teams. We want to do more. We can experiment more. We can take on more smaller projects as well, pavilion and so on, as research projects. If we are larger, we have more of a buffer of, let's say, also allowing us to innovate. Not only through the schools, but internally. So that's my idea, to grow the firm. The scale of Foster is for me a great example. Foster is one of the world's largest firms and is still very innovative. They have great research, great facilities. So that's my ambition with Zaha Architects, to stay innovative, and that is for me possible. Actually, it coincides with also growing in size at the same time.
What is it, one trait of behavior you look or appreciate in young students, so that a lot of students were part of this?
Well, students, I think, very important. First of all, you got to work. You have to be willing to put the time in to acquire the skills. And I know it's always a dilemma. You want to start designing right away, and you want to do this. I mean, and then also to do it with the design, But be patient and know that when initially you learn new tools, you will a little bit slower. But later on, you're going to be much faster. And you can also later do things you could never do with the more simple tools you have. So that's always the balance you have to strike, that you only have the time as a student. I mean, once you're in the office, they will want you have to be too quick. You have to do what you can with what you can. We still have training, so we do this, but we can't do that all the time. So we're relying on the student years for somebody to acquire the skills. But at the same time, of course, you need to try them out. You need to show us that you can design complex buildings. Of course, I would love also somebody who is smart and knows why we're doing what we're doing here, and to understand the theory of architecture, the theory of parametrism, for instance, as well as just the skills and the raw talent. So that's very important. That you're also eloquent and you can defend your work. And there's a lot of criticism, a lot of misunderstanding. And I'm aware of this because if you just superficially copy some flippant forms, and your professors will squash you if you don't know what you're doing there, and maybe you're also just playing around. You have to be tolerant as well. I mean, playing is also learning. But at a certain point, when you present the project to your professors, you got to know what you're doing. It needs to have matured and be rational and defensible, for the sake of the good urban space, for the sake of the better life process. So that's very important. I mean, for a mature architect, then you can also stand up and get further in the office, so that you become a leader. So finally, I think those who don't plateau too early, who can break through and become leaders of their field, and that could be very much in our firm. So we have many people, professors and teachers in our company, people lecturing, people presenting projects, presenting to clients, winning over clients. I mean, I can't do that myself, all of that. That is where in the end what pays off is that you had invested in the theory part, in understanding the purposes architecture has to fulfill for society. As a client, and that's not only pure architectural theory, you also have to mediate this with what society demands of us, and to be eloquent there. That's very important. That's where you may become a leader, but you still have to have the talent, the skill as well to get there. So it's a tough order, but you have enough time. I think you have 5 or 6 years. If you concentrate, you don't waste your time. You can do that.
Because a lot of undergraduate students are studying at Sashi School of Architecture as well, are a part of this webinar, and other architecture school students as well in India. After finish their undergrad, like you mentioned, and you show the presentation of what happens at AADRL as well. A lot of projects what you do. Maybe they have an opportunity to. They had an opportunity to witness such.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. I mean, look, if you have finished your graduate school, undergrad, so I would recommend you actually go to work for a year or two, maybe in an interesting office, maybe a small office where you learn more, maybe XDRL, there are plenty of them in India. And so you also get hungry again for school, and you matured a bit, you know what you're doing. Then you get the most of it. If you then kind of save up or get a loan or somebody's helping you to get to go to a master degree, you can come to London or elsewhere. Then you get most out of it. And then when you after your master, you want to work for a major company, it's very good that you've actually worked before. So I wouldn't go straight from undergrad into graduate school. I would put in 2 or 3 years. Go back to school. You will flourish much more. You will get more out of it. You can actually lead a team. You can then get hired and be it's not, sometimes it's not good to rush too much. I don't care if you're 25 or 30. I just care how good you are. And if you're already 32 or 33, perfect for you to start full-on professional work at that point. I mean, you should have done some previous work, but that's where you can. So we at DRL, we often have people in their late 20s, maybe even early 30s. So that's perfectly fine. I wouldn't rush it. And that's what counts is where you. I mean, it's the same with. I mean, Peter, a lot of the greatest architects, they started their office was 50. You
Yeah.
know, because they were building the repertoire, they're building the idea. They were, you know, so you know, if you think of Peter Eisenman, I mean, that's literally when he started. Zar started earlier, but not that early. And she put it in teaching and learning and so on. Anyway, that's my idea. If you want to reach high, give yourself time. Don't be impatient.
Very nice quote. No, like you mentioned, we have. Like you mentioned, we'll share the video with participants where they can look at the resource of the book which you had shared. That was one of the questions which we had in mind. But we have around 50 to 100 questions which are real time, which are popping out. So we have picked two of them. Rupesh, my colleague, has picked two of them. Rupesh, can we ask them?
Sure, Raghav. So hi, sir. Good listening to your presentation. Thanks for the great inspiration which you showed us today. And from the offline platform, we have two questions, very general ones, and I think that will be a very good answer if you could put some inspiration into that. The first question being, what is the global vision for ZHA for the next decade, or it maybe for the future? So on the whole, that would be the first question, sir, for you.
Well, I mean, what I would love is, for instance, if we get an opportunity, the work I just showed with the Design Research Lab, if we get a chance to do some of that, I mean, we're working with some headquarter buildings, so we're doing interiors and corporate interiors. At the same time, we're working with a firm like Techno to do kind of mobile meeting rooms, but we haven't got a chance yet to implement, first of all, to test out our simulation tools, but also to bring in some of this interactive intelligence space. So that's a big vision I'm hoping for, and we need to, I think we're going to be there. We need another 5 years, I think, before we can start for real. But we're working also with interactive designers together who have some experience in the art space. That's where some of those installations exist. That's one of my ambitions. The other ambition and vision is more in urban design, in urban integration. So to become a curator of a multi-earth or urban cluster. So where we've done large urban projects where we can do a single-hand design kind of a number of towers, but when it becomes larger, that's no longer realistic. But I also don't want the urban cluster to become like a pile of a heap of garbage, as I call it, a kind of garbage spill, which is mostly happening if you leave it uncurated, if you let a kind of random sample of architects do their own thing, that in the end collapses the identity of the district, and it becomes what I call garbage spill urbanization. And you can see that even in the city of London. I mean, it is not, you don't know what to expect. One behind the building, there's no coherence, no inference potential, no navigation potential. Each icon is trying to scream louder than the other, and in the end, it's all a cacophony that collapses in terms of its characterfulness and generates no identity. It generates a strange sameness because these clusters look the same everywhere, because they're equally, let's say, disorienting and equally divergent in their elements, and therefore they become this white noise. So that's a big ambition of mine, to get a chance to do a urban district where we would select the architects would have to have the ethos of affiliating to each other, and they all have to have the repertoire pragmatism. That's the tool with which you can be resonant and responsive to neighbors. It's not only that they're all the same style, but they're more specifically crafted so that they have these affiliations, resonances, reflections, where every building reflects every other building in its surroundings. And that's what you find, what I find very exciting. And I'm actually at this point, I'm trying to develop the testing this with a group of students. So I have 12 students, and they're all doing the individual buildings. And in the end, several of each. In the end, I have a whole urban district, and I will show it to you next time. And then we can judge if this is neither a sterile, monotonous kind of Moscow suburb, nor is a garbage spill you find all across the world, but it is something different. It is something which is complex, variegated order, legible order, something intricate, diverse, and yet unified and characterful. So that's my ambition. And that's not only Mazadi the architects, that's my personal ambition.
Thanks for giving a cue. You mentioned next time, so soon, soon or later, we would have you as well in some part of collaboration. So next question, Rupesh, from maybe one from.
Is that the last question?
Last
Yes.
last one for the day.
Yeah, so I think Raghav, this question which is asked from an anonymous person would be perfect, I think, because any ideas and possibilities to adapt the principles of parametricism into smaller scale programs. So that is how he's asked the question. So maybe Sir can answer that.
Of course. I mean, parametricism is universally applicable. I'm actually applying it also to fashion. So I've designed some of my own suits. And the spirit here is this: even in a small thing like a jacket, you would differentiate. So what I've done with the suit, first of all, it's elastic and stretchy, so it's high performance. It's super light, so it's the latest engineering. But if you look at, so there are certain areas are perforated, certain areas are stiffened, so to more movement, other to restrain movement, to give you nice shape. Then it's the perspiration. So this is the kind of, and then the kind of one zone flows into the other, and it looks like an organic piece. That's the vision of, for instance, just a jacket. With the principles of parametricism, and it looks elegant, it looks different. The same as if you have an apartment, particularly if you have to fit in many different things. And your body isn't a rectangle, so you need to be ergonomic as well, and you need to maybe have also changefulness, so things can transform from one condition into the other. So that would be an application of parametricism. Also, for instance, a residential building, you wouldn't necessarily want, exactly the same product, exactly the same 50 square meter for everybody. You want a whole range of sizes, some studios, multiple differently dissected apartments. They're looking into different directions, into the sun, away from the sun. So there would be this kind of parametric variation. But it's also, if you move along the facade, you don't necessarily jumble them up. You gradually move from one condition to another. And then as you move around the corner, you're moving from the southern side to the kind of western side into the northern side. Gradually, the condition of the balconies, of the shading, gradually transforms. And these would be in each detail, and also in a smaller building, all the way to the interior, where you also maybe don't have, maybe there's a gradual transition from the kitchen into the living room, into the dining room, into the, and then from in the bedroom, it's actually quite open between bathroom and bedroom, and so you can have these blending ideas. You can make, in particular bathroom, you can make it nice, soft and ergonomic. You can play with levels and ceiling heights. They don't need to be the same everywhere, and you can nest them, the different apartments with respect to each other. We've done it a little bit in our, so I think there's no scale. I mean, parametricism, just to sum this up, is most potent on the large scale, on the urban scale, because that's where you really, if you kill everybody, if you just do endless repetition, I mean, where you don't even find your own apartment. Every time you go home, you're stressfully trying to find where's my apartment door or my tower. I mean, even I'm living in a row house, and I mean, even have to concentrate, not passing by my own door. That's not nice. In urbanism, particularly, if you have to, we have to kind of navigate. That's the most important. In the big building, it's very important to have the full repertoire of parametricism, because you have different sites where it has to adapt to different urban conditions, and there's a northern side, a southern side, and so on. But in the small, it's less important. You can get away. I mean, it's not going to kill yourself to live in a minimalist apartment. That's quite elegant and nice. So the urgency is less strong, and I can also, but still there, I think you'll get the edge, you get the advantage. And if you think, and sometimes it's even unconscious, if you look at the products of Nike, the most lightweight, high-tech shoes, with sophisticated knitted, computational knitted, that's parametrism pure, and they don't even know it. I mean, by the way, they're looking at our work as well, and we actually have sessions with Nike as well, but you don't think of it as being part of the discourse. It's just high performance.
Okay.
But it is parametrism. That shows you that parametrism is deeply the kind of rational style for our computationally empowered era, where we kind of also tailoring and crafting, and we're no longer, you know, we can 3D print finely fine-tuned and adaptive products, and that's why it's you know that we're on the right track. It's not a kind of arbitrary invention, and that's why it's one style. It's because it's one era, it's one kind of technological era, social era, and of course the style itself, it's a paradigm. It has so many internal variations and subsidiary forms of expression. It's a huge diversity within, but none of them is modernism. None of them is postmodernism. None of them is deconstructivism, but there's many rich repertoires within. So it's very open. It's very open to the evolution, but it's also, to some extent, it's not arbitrary. It's not random. It is something particular with a lot of internal richness. I sometimes say the internal variety of stylistic, of articulation, of expression is more than all the previous styles put together. And I believe that. It's the endless forms of nature still, but it is not a mechanically extruded piece.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But the endless, you know, nature produced many more forms than let's say 20th century industrial forms.
Agreed.
That's the difference. 20th century industrial forms was modernism. Endless forms was nature. In particular, it's recognizable. It's distinct. It's neither postmodernism nor deconstructivism nor modernism, but it's in its own trajectory, a thousandfold richer, and it's compelling. It is the true style of our era, and I leave you with that. Bye.
Hello, Patrick.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for this amazing opportunity. And just as a coincidence, at Sasi School of Architecture as well, we have fashion designing, we have product designing, and it's sort of a mixed, sort of a diverse campus where it's such a coincidence, you know, as you had mentioned. And we are more than happy to, you know, to support your research in parametrism.
Look, this is what it's always been since the, you know, the Bauhaus was already like that.
Correct. No, you know, like Bauhaus.
And you know, there's a reason, you know, Corbusier designed furniture, and Mies van der Rohe did, and so did we. And so Zadid is like this, the Bauhaus is like this, you are like this. That's the world of design.
Correct.
And I leave you with that. So I think, all I demand in return for what I've given you is read one of my articles.
For sure.
Yes.
Director would like to thank you for
Surely,
this.
yes. We would do that. Thank you, Architect Patrick.
Okay, bye.
And we would like,
Thank you very much.
to host you when you're in India.
Surely, yes.
Okay, great. And throw this thing online. Everybody can listen to that.
We are recorded and it's going.
Facebook as of now.
Our chairman as well would like to thank you as well. Our chairman, Rajdeepan as well.
Well, thanks for the platform. Thank you, guys. You're very cool. I like you guys. See you next time.
Thank you very much.
Patrick.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all the participants as well, around 250 to 300 people who have joined here and who have been so patient. And thank you for all the participants on Facebook as well. We would share this YouTube recorded session on YouTube, so you can have a look at that. And I would like to thank Sasi School of Architecture for creating an amazing platform, an international platform where designers, architects, and professionals could meet and interact and witness such a great platform. Thank you all once again. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Raghav.